The forest had always been a subject of whispered warnings and unspoken dread. Locals called it the Devil's Hollow, a vast, brooding expanse of trees that seemed to loom taller and thicker than the surrounding woods. It was said that no one who ventured deep into its heart ever returned. Some of the older residents claimed the trees were alive, watching, waiting. Despite the warnings, a group of 5 hikers, eager for adventure, decided to test their luck. Among them was Sarah, a seasoned backpacker, and her younger brother, Tim. Along with their friends, Mark, Jess, and Derek, they planned a weekend camping trip to push their boundaries and explore the notorious forest. They were skeptical of the tales, chalking them up to old folklore designed to scare off tourists. As they approached the entrance to Devil's Hollow, the forest was eerily silent. No birds chirped, no wind rustled the leaves. The thick, tangled branches formed a natural canopy, blocking out most of the sunlight and casting long, twisted shadows across the forest floor. Tim, the youngest and most nervous of the group, felt an inexplicable chill crawl down his spine. "We'll be fine," Sarah assured him, her voice sounding hollow in the oppressive silence. "Just stories, remember?" The first day of their hike went as expected. They followed a narrow, barely visible path that wound deeper into the forest. As dusk settled, they made camp, lighting a fire that seemed pitiful against the all-consuming darkness pressing in from all sides. As the night grew darker, strange sounds echoed from within the trees, a distant, rhythmic creaking, almost like footsteps, but slower, heavier. "What's that?" Jess asked, her voice tight with fear. "Probably just the wind," Mark shrugged, though his eyes flickered uneasily toward the shadows. But there was no wind. As night stretched on, Sarah was the first to notice that Derek had gone. One moment he had been sitting by the fire, laughing and talking with the others. The next, he had vanished without a sound. They searched the campsite, called his name, but there was no trace of him. "We'll look for him in the morning," Sarah said, though she could barely mask the tremor in her voice. They huddled closer to the fire, each of them too afraid to speak. When morning came, they found Derek's backpack near a gnarled ancient tree at the edge of the clearing. Its roots were twisted, almost humanoid in their form, wrapping around the pack like skeletal fingers. There were no footprints, no sign of struggle. It was as though Derek had simply been swallowed by the forest itself. Panic set in. They debated whether to continue searching for Derek or head back. But when they checked their GPS, they realized something terrifying. No matter how far they had hiked, the device insisted they were still at the forest's edge, as though they had never moved at all. Sarah took charge, urging the group to stay together, but the forest seemed to shift around them, twisting paths that had been clear before into confusing mazes of trees and underbrush. It was as if the forest itself was herding them deeper. By noon, Jess was missing. One moment she had been walking at the back of the group. The next, her spot in the line was empty. No scream, no call for help, just gone, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of pine and damp earth. The remaining 3 grew frantic, calling out her name until their voices were hoarse, but the forest absorbed their cries, mocking them with its silence. Mark was the next to disappear. They had stopped for a brief rest, and when Sarah and Tim turned back, he was no longer sitting on the log beside them. There were no signs, no warnings, only the same crushing quiet and those unnerving trees, their branches thick like sinewy arms, almost reaching for them. Tim and Sarah were the last. Night fell quickly, and the fire they lit barely penetrated the inky darkness. Sarah sat beside her brother, gripping his hand tightly. They didn't speak. What was there to say? The stories were true. The forest was alive, and it had claimed their friends. Tim's breathing became shallow, panicked, and Sarah tried to calm him, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. Suddenly, a voice whispered from the trees. Derek's voice, calling out from the shadows, asking for help. Then Jess, then Mark. Their voices twisted and overlapping, beckoning them deeper into the woods. But Sarah knew it wasn't them. It was the forest, mimicking the voices of the dead, luring them into its grasp. By dawn, Tim was gone. Sarah never made it out.